So in this video, we're going to be talking about why I became a therapist in my 30s. So if that career is interesting to you, or you might just want to know what that journey was like, then stick around. My name is Marios. I'm a trainee counselling psychologist living in London. And on this channel, we talk about psychology and anything I think you might find interesting or useful. Like and subscribe, it really helps keep the channel going. Right, so how did I come to become a therapist in my 30s? So I think the best place to start is when I first started thinking about entering the field of psychology generally, and how I eventually got to realize that therapy was the subsection of psychology, let's say, that I wanted to enter into. So psychology was one of the first jobs I ever thought I wanted. Like, you know, when you're a kid, you imagine being, you know, a doctor, lawyer. My first one, or what I remember to be my first one, was psychologist. And that changed quite a lot because I had a lot of other things I then thought I wanted to do as well. But then when it came around to university, I started having doubts like, is it the most employable? Because I couldn't really imagine what the job was at the end, even though psychology is a very employable degree. It's more generalist, but it does show that you have a number of skills like deductive reasoning, critical reasoning, statistics, understanding how people work, cognitive biases, and all these things that can apply to a broad range of fields. I, at the time, just wasn't convinced. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. So I ended up studying biology, and I did a master's degree in something else as well, and more in the legal field. And then that kind of took me down one direction in the corporate world until I was 27. And I was still thinking, like probably 11 years after I first had the idea of being a psychologist, oh, well, that interest is still really big in me. And usually when I have time to read my own things, they'll be in the topic of psychology or something related. So I thought, well, this isn't going away. It's been this many years, so maybe I should make my work more about this. So that was one thing. But also another thing I noticed is in my corporate jobs, I was enjoying much more the sitting down and talking to people whom I worked with, rather than doing things like the more administrative or strategic or more businessy, let's say, responsibilities. I really enjoyed the people element and hearing people's stories, the scientists I work with, the innovators. It became more clear to me that I was more interested in the human factor than the business factor or profits or, you know, doing stuff that's important to a business particularly. I was much more interested in people. So I thought, right, well, I should at least study it to see if, you know, I'm any good at it and if I'm interested in it, more importantly. So I did the master's degree at Birkbeck. It was a conversion course that was 3 years for me part-time, just because there was a foundation year, but now I don't think that's available. And to be honest, if I could do it again, I probably wouldn't do it because it wasn't that necessary. And in that, you covered everything that you would need to essentially as part of an undergraduate in psychology. You do obviously a lot more as an undergraduate because that's full-time, 3 years. But the conversion course is just to enable you to enter onto other courses in psychology in the UK if you had a different degree in a different subject. So I did have a degree in a different subject, so I needed to do this conversion course to do any more training, including as a therapist, but I wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to do yet. I was still thinking, well, maybe I should be an organizational psychologist, which is someone who works with companies to do things like personality tests or recruitment strategies, measuring productivity in the workplace, happiness in the workplace. So it's kind of applied psychology, but in the corporate setting. And I also thought about becoming more of a behavioral geneticist. So like how, because my undergrad was in biology and I had genetics as part of that. And that was what my master's degree research project was on in psychology. It was behavioral genetics. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll be someone who can research like how genes or combinations of genes can impact our behavior, maybe how we can predict mental health development and that kind of stuff. And that is interesting to me still. And it's good to have that skill set as part of being a psychologist. But I didn't think that would be everything I did because, again, there was no people element. So I kept coming back to this idea. I really want to work closely with people. I really enjoyed their stories. I really enjoyed working with people about things that people care about. And what matters to them individually actually is quite a big one. I graduated from my master's and I thought, right, I still don't feel like I'm any closer to working directly with people. So I started looking at doing behavioral science, which is more like psychology applied to products and services that nudge people to do behaviors or not do behaviors that either is good for them or that the app that you're designing or the product you're designing wants them to do. Ideally both, so that you're not manipulating people in a way that's unethical, but people use it for both those purposes. And I do still find that very interesting. It just didn't motivate me enough. I didn't feel connected to it enough. It was just an interesting angle to things. And so I didn't want to make it my all in terms of my career. So it was like organizational, behavioral science, behavioral genetics, and then I thought maybe therapy. I did have that in the back of my head, but I thought when you study psychology, actually therapy isn't a big part of what you learn. In fact, it's not much at all. Like you'll learn that certain treatments are good for certain mental health disorders, but you don't really go into what the process of therapy is like or how to become a therapist and how it's similar and how it overlaps with being a psychologist. You go more the pure social science kind of route when you study psychology, at least in the UK. So I didn't really know what it meant to become a therapist. And I thought, well, I actually had some experience that was relevant. You know, I worked with autistic kids in America for a year before I did my undergrad. I supported students as part of their student support service at universities. So like students who had mental or physical disabilities or just needed some sort of support. I was someone who would support them in that, whether it's note-taking or helping them practically manage things. And so again, my history always included some sort of supportive role. That was another clue that actually I wanted to work with people more directly. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe I should try it again, but try and get more of a therapeutic experience where it's actually someone who's come for a specific problem or needs specific support, and I can get support from professionals who are more developed and experienced than I am, and then we can go from there. So I ended up getting an internship for a year and a half where I effectively worked as admin for a certain amount of time. So it was like taking calls and appointments and setting people up with therapists who were working in that practice. But then also they provided training, which was really unique to that placement. And I really appreciated that because to pay for another course was going to be expensive, and I already paid for the master's degree myself. So I didn't really want to go into another course. So it was really perfect, this internship that I got at the private therapy clinic, which I've probably mentioned on this channel before. And a quite popular video on limerence that I did for their channel is online as well. Yeah, I really appreciated that they were offering both the training and the more administrative side of it. But after we got training for a certain amount of time, we were allowed to see low risk clients with supervision. And that was where I actually got my first experience as a therapist, which was huge. And I remember that first session being really big for me because I remember it ending and it was like, you know, I felt very focused in the session, but then when it was over, it was, I mean, I guess an easy word to use was elated. Like I was really happy, ecstatic. I don't know what it was. And I just felt like that felt really right. And I think I was like, right. That was probably the first time I'd ever had that feeling with regards to a job. Maybe the success of getting a job gave me a similar high, but it was really short-lived and it wasn't really about me. It was about the success of getting the job. But this, I felt like, wow, like the actual process, the actual doing it felt so meaningful. And I thought, right, there's definitely something here. I have to keep exploring. So I stuck around with that internship, and eventually that became an honorary assistant psychologist role. And that's what set me up really well to get onto the doctorate that I'm on now. So the doctorate I'm on now is the counselling psychology professional doctorate at City St George's, University of London. And that will get me HCPC registration and BPS accreditation. Effectively, for those 3 years, you get quite a big bang for your buck. Like, it's still expensive. I still had to take out postgraduate loans via the government, which helps me pay my tuition fees. It's a really difficult route, to be honest, financially and in terms of the amount of work. But for the amount that you are qualified to do once you're done, I think it's very good value and actually doesn't take that long, given that if you did another one like a diploma or certificate, you might have to do several before you get the types of accreditations that you'll get on the doctorate. And you might not even ever get, I think, to some of the accreditations that you'll get on the doctorate. Plus, you get to call yourself a counselling psychologist, which is cool, and that's a protected title in the UK. It's also, I think, like what makes it really appropriate for me is that it trains you to be a practitioner scientist. So there's the research element, but you're also a practitioner that's actually seeing people. And for me, being a therapist means doing both, just what I enjoy to do. And now I've gotten the experience of teaching at the university I'm at. So I teach third year undergrads Introduction to Counselling Psychology, and that is super fulfilling. I really, really enjoy doing that. So I really feel like I'm now down a really good path. If you're thinking about it, the thing I'd say is try and get as immediate experience as you can working with someone with a certain need. It doesn't need to be a mental health disorder specifically. It could just be one where you are in a supportive role, and see what it's like mentoring, coaching, whatever it is, that person. If you can get direct therapeutic experience, go for it. But I imagine for a lot of people that might feel far away. And if you don't have that, then try and go for something that's more a care role, a supportive role, and that can follow into a therapeutic role later on. At least that's what worked for me. Cool, so I hope that was useful, and stick around for more of these. Leave a comment if you want me to do more on this subject or if you have any questions, and I'll get to those. Cool, look after yourself.